And the third thing for me is to reinvest those dollars in the public-private partnerships that historically have built the technologies of the future. So if you look, for example, there's a mythology that the people on the far right like to tell. They like to pretend that business sort of springs forth out of the ground. It's like a new progeny coming out of Zeus's forehead, right? And it makes no sense. It's not the way that things have historically worked in this country. If you look what's worked, look at these big, bold programs. Look at the Erie Canal, right? Look at the National Highway System. Look at the Transcontinental Railroad. Look at the Internet. If you look at those are all government programs, right? Where the government spent billions of dollars, in today's dollars, billions of dollars investing in essentially public-private partnerships. And what you see, and this is one of the things that makes me different than many Democrats. Look, I understand as a Democrat we want to fund social welfare programs. But what makes me different is the realization that the best social welfare program ever created is a good private sector job. And before you redistribute wealth, somebody has to create that wealth. And we ought not punish the people who create the wealth. We need to understand, if you really care about working men and women, someone has to provide a job for these people. So what I'm proposing is $200 billion a year for 5 years, a total of $1 trillion, reinvesting in America. I mean, we clearly figured out how to come up with more money than that to bail out Wall Street, and we did that in a matter of days. So the notion that we can't deliberately lay out an investment strategy in America, to me, is ridiculous.
For infrastructure.
That's right. And now step back from America for a moment. Look at China. Why is China's economy thriving? Why are they outpacing us right now? In the 1980s, the Chinese sent teams of government officials, of engineers, of economists, of academics, of business folks. They came and studied America month after month after month, and they basically said, why has this worked in America? Why is America's economy as a general rule thriving? And they found three things. It's the three things we just talked about. Exactly. That's right. But they said it's the three things we just spoke of. It's investment in public sector education, right? It's investment in infrastructure, and it's public-private partnerships. The Chinese then go back, and they put a deliberate plan together, okay? And they launched this plan in 1986, and the project was called Project 863 for the Chinese calendar year. So they launched Project 863, and they invest billions and billions and billions of dollars in these three things we're talking about. Fast forward to today. You wonder why China has the leading wind power companies in the world, the leading solar power companies, why we're working on trying to get one high-speed rail link in the state of Florida, and why China has dozens of high-speed rail projects currently underway. Why? Because they had a plan. Why? Because they copied what America did right over 200 years. I tell people every night, the rest of the world is so good at copying what America does right. America needs to copy what America does right. Because if we do, we've got a great future. And if we don't, we're going to continue to drift in the wrong direction.
We've become a victim of our own success.
That's it.
And that, the country has become overconfident and,
That's right.
and soft.
Yeah, and I think that when you look at politicians whose sole purpose is self-perpetuation, right, that to me is at the heart of the problem. The three things I talk about every night are private sector job creation, clean government, and getting out of Afghanistan and reinvesting those dollars here in America. On clean government, there are two things I talk about each night. The first is publicly financed federal elections, right? You have to drain the swamp of all this money. It's crazy that to run for office, you need millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, that doesn't effectuate proper dialogue. That just means that somebody's going to get on TV and create name recognition like they're selling soap. But beside publicly financed federal elections, I feel very strongly that you have to have term limits. I tell people that it doesn't help any of us to have these folks go to Washington for longer than Moses and the Israelites wandered in the desert. I mean, it helps them, right? So it's these career politicians, Richard Blumenthal chief among them, where you see somebody who's been in office for 20 or 30 years, and their sole focus is getting on TV and building up name recognition so they can run for the next office. That doesn't work. Clearly, that was not the intent of the founding fathers of this nation, but that model doesn't work, because what do you get? You get politicians whose sole intent in every action is to figure out, how do I perpetuate myself? So you saw in that New York Times piece that was so devastating to Richard Blumenthal, where the reporter tags along with Blumenthal for a couple of days. says to Blumenthal, they're sitting there doing an interview, and he says to Blumenthal, how would you have voted on TARP, on the Troubled Asset Relief Program, the bailout of the American economy? And Blumenthal gets nervous and looks over at an aide and says, have I taken a position on that yet? Can you imagine? Now, here's the thing. You don't need to be a Nobel Prize winning economist or some great businessman or a rocket scientist to know if the American banking system is collapsing, right? And if you can't flow credit to even the biggest companies, and if we're within days, agreed by Republicans, Democrats, and everybody in the middle, that this thing could go down, right? What is the right action? The right action is to step in and take action. And when you got a guy running for the U.S. Senate who spent his entire life staring at a TV camera, and that guy has to turn around in front of a New York Times reporter when he clearly knows everything he's saying is being recorded and written down, has to turn and say to an aide, have I taken a position on that? And then hems and haws, and 3 hours later, according to the reporter, then has to sort of email in an answer or call in an answer and say, well, I oppose it. You oppose it? So first, you didn't know where you stood on it. Then you tried to figure out the safest thing to do. Then you wrung your hands together for 3 hours. Then you said, well, it's most politically expedient for me now to claim that I didn't take a position, therefore I oppose it. You oppose it. So you would have let the U.S. banking system collapse and the world economy go into depression. That doesn't strike me as somebody who's got the skill set to be a U.S. senator. That strikes me as somebody who's got the skill set to maybe be a game show host, but only if they can, quite frankly, get a little better at their speech patterns. It's shameful. That, to me, is what politics has become, this concept of endlessly playing it safe. You know, there's no leadership sitting there with your little boat in the port. Go out, you know, be bold, do something, say something, take a position. And that's an anathema. That really is an anathema to these politicians.
Well, I think you can see that people are really hungering for it in the support that that congressmen like Alan Grayson,
yeah.
You know, who got up on the floor and said, you know, this is the Republican health plan.
Yeah.
Die.
Yeah,
Die soon.
Yeah, he's the quip master. Absolutely.
But I really do think that people are hungry for change.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we voted in Obama.
That's right.
And
I think there's been an element of frustration. One of the things, I have a unique perspective on this because obviously I've been out there for a year straight every day campaigning. And so one of the things that's interesting is I'm literally going from town to town in this state, and I'm sitting each night with Democrats at these town committees. Many of these people will tell you, look, I'm concerned that Obama's not moving the way that he claimed he would in the campaign. I'm worried he's not moving fast enough. I'm worried he's not being bold enough. And it's interesting because I'm clearly hearing that from a growing number of people across the state.
Whereas on the Fox News channel, they would have us all believe that he has gone too far.
Yeah, and that, with all due respect to the folks at Fox, that is such malarkey. I mean, the notion that he is somehow some wild extremist. Look, they tried to paint him that way, and Sarah Palin and Joe Lieberman, the rest of these people who spoke at the Republican convention, tried to paint him that way in order to try to vilify him and beat him in the general election. It's a silly argument. They say he's palling around with terrorists or he's a socialist or whatever. Right? That is just such nonsense. If there's a criticism, and again, I support this president, if there's a criticism, it's that he's not doing enough.
He's very centrist.
He's a centrist, and there's a corporate element to it.
And and he's disappointed, the left wing and progressives.
Yeah. But this notion, and part of what we need to do in this country, because anybody can sort of take to the air, anybody can get on the internet, anybody can sit in their underpants with a bottle of Pop-Off in a basement in Connecticut and blog, right? And so one of the things we need to do as rational adults is say, when an argument is just absurd, like the argument that he's somehow a dangerous socialist extremist, and you hear it on talk radio constantly, we need to stand up and say, time out.
Yeah.
That's not factually true. Yeah. Now, you may disagree with his plan. You may truly think that, hey, I don't want to see a social welfare state. I don't want to see a progressive plan for health care. You may disagree with things he does, But the notion that this guy's got a hammer and sickle on him is preposterous. He does not have a hammer and sickle on him.